and welcome. You are watching News 9 Live. I am Krishna Kumar. The United States of America has recognized the McMahon line as the international boundary between China and India's Arunachal Pradesh. Now, what that means is the bipartisan Senate resolution in the US sees Arunachal Pradesh as an integral part of India. Now, besides that acknowledgement, the resolution also condemns China's multiple bids to change the status quo along the line of actual control. Now, China's military aggression includes maneuvers which provoked the standoff in Doklam in the year 2017. And 3 years past that, in 2020, it was the fatal melee that occurred in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh. And in 2022, it was the clash in Arunachal Pradesh's Taiwan. The American resolution acknowledges all of that and emphasizes how critical it is for Washington to stand shoulder to shoulder with strategic partners in the region, especially India. So what does that acknowledgement mean for India? And what ramifications does it hold for the region as well as for the wider Indo-Pacific and the world as we know it? Joining me on the show to understand and help us, all of us watching this live broadcast on News 9 Live understand is Sandeep Unnidan, editor of News 9 Plus. Sandeep, thank you so much for taking time out in between your busy schedule to speak to us. This is a very important event. Before we go any further, we have a couple of very important guests joining us as well. We have Ambassador Deepak Vora, the former Indian ambassador to US, France, Spain, Poland, Armenia and Sudan joining us on this broadcast. We also have Ashwani Sivach, Major General Ashwani Sivach, defense expert joining us on this broadcast. So before we get to those gentlemen, for all the analysis, Sandeep, let's first understand the importance of the McMahon line per se. There are two borders with China that are very important. One is the line of actual control and there's the McMahon line. But not many people understand the McMahon line all that well and its importance and its significance. So if you can enlighten us on that.
Of course, Krishna. So, I mean, the McMahon line dates back to 1913 when Henry McMahon was the British representative at the talks, the tripartite talks between India, China, British India, the Tibetan government and the Chinese government, where they wanted to actually delineate the land boundaries between Tibet and India. Now the Chinese sat out of these discussions, but what was finally inked at the Simla conference was the McMahon line, which was both Tibet and India agreed that this was going to be the boundary separating both their territories. The Chinese have constantly objected to this line. They've never recognized it, and they call it a colonial, colonial baggage and all of that. But this line, of course, is about almost 900 kilometers long. It starts from Bhutan and goes all the way up to Myanmar, and it's one of the longest contested boundaries in the world. It's the overall line of actual control and the McMahon line are about 3,400 kilometers, and the Chinese have disputed this. They claim all of Arunachal Pradesh as lower Tibet, and which of course is a sovereign part of the Indian. It's an Indian state. The Chinese don't recognize it to be part of Indian territory, and they've been aggressively building up infrastructure. They've not recognized the residents of Arunachal Pradesh to be part of India. As you know, a couple of years back, there was a very famous case of people from Arunachal Pradesh, the Chinese saying that they don't require travel documents to come into to China because they're actually part of Chinese territory. So it's one of the bones of contention between India and China. And in fact, what the Senate resolution, it merely reiterates what the United States first affirmed in 1962 after the border war between India and China. The fact that it recognizes the McMahon line to be the international boundary between India and China, and the fact that Arunachal Pradesh is sovereign Indian territory.
Right, and which basically means that what has happened right now is something that has been happening in 4 decades. So this is a very important event, but it's not all about India and China as far as this particular decision by the Senate, which is the upper house of the American Parliament, is concerned. There's lots to interpret with this decision, with this announcement, with this acknowledgement. And to understand that, let's go across to our guests who are joining us on this broadcast. Major General Ashwani Sivach, let me begin with you. As a defense expert, this clearly is a strategic decision by the US to do it at this stage, to come up with this acknowledgement.
Absolutely correct, Krishan. There is no doubt. The Americans have made it very clear that McMahon line is a boundary between India and China. It is based on a watershed principle, and it was way back in 1914 when there was a treaty which was signed between British India and the Tibetans. That time it was a part of Tibet, and the Chinese were in presence, though they have not signed it. But having recognized this, it makes our case much stronger. And there is a bipartisan understanding in Senate. Both Republican and Democrats have clearly accepted that complete Arunachal Pradesh is a part of India, and the boundary between India and China now, so-called Tibet, is a McMahon line which is based on a watershed. I suppose the aim is very clear, to put pressure on China, because China has been trying to claim an area which is not there. Let us assume it was a controversial area. In 1962, when they attacked India and they came down up to the plains of Assam, but they went back. Why did they went back? Because that was not their area. Now, this is an afterthought what they started doing, that they start claiming complete Arunachal Pradesh is a part of South Tibet, and then they are trying to put pressure. This is a tactic to put pressure on you so that you accept something in Ladakh. Now, this has been basically what the Chinese have been doing, that in case if they have to accept Arunachal Pradesh as McMahon line, you should able to basically negotiate on their terms in Ladakh, and that is the crunch point.
Right. That is the crunch point. Let's now take this across to Ambassador Deepak Vora, who also joins us. He's a former Indian ambassador to the US, France, Spain, Poland, Armenia, and Sudan. In your experience, what I wanted to ask is that clearly this move by the US comes at a critical point in time as far as global geopolitics is concerned. So there's lots more going than just the US recognizing the McMahon line.
Thank you very much, sir. Always be a pleasure to be on Network 18, Network 9, even if it's digital at this point of time. And I've just heard what the General said. His knowledge and expertise is much greater than mine. But thank you for asking me on the show. What has now happened, sir, and this is something that I'd like to clarify so that the millions of people watching your show understand. A Senate resolution, even if it's endorsed by the House of Representatives, doesn't mean it's American law. There is a character who sits in a building called the White House. Presently, it's some sleepy chap, and he's supposed to sign. And then it becomes law. It becomes a part of the, so to speak, of the American Book of Regulations or the American Constitution. That hasn't happened. It will. Second issue, why is it happening now? Is it suddenly that the American chaps in the Senate have said, oh, India, we love you, we've just discovered you? No. It's
really
China.
Not.
It's China, we hate you. And so we are going to be lovey-dovey with your friends. Let me tell you a little story, apocryphal, but it sets out the reality of China. There is this chap, Ping Pong, or whatever tingling this chap's name is, and he's walking and someone comes up, a farmer, and says, Comrade Ping Pong, we have so many potatoes that piled one on top of the other, they would reach all the way to God. The farmer is very excited. But God does not exist, says Ping Pong. Exactly, says the farmer. Neither do the potatoes. Now, this is a reflection of the harsh truth that China has to face. It is trapped between fantasy and reality. You know, sir, you know all about the McMahon line. I'm glad you called it correctly. Most people say McMahon. Interestingly, this character who signed it, Henry McMahon, was a British Indian foreign secretary, and they've created enough problems. You probably also heard of the Durand line, and that character, Mortimer Durand, was also a British Indian foreign secretary. All foreign secretaries create problems. Present foreign secretary, please excuse me, you're a brilliant guy. So this kind of thing has been going on for quite some time with the stupid British fellows. But what do we draw from this? That public enemy number one across the board, sir. Today is a country, you've heard of it, called China. And northern Arunachal means Tibet, or that part of whatever China refers to. I mean, it's also northern Arunachal Pradesh is also known as Tibet, and it's soon going to be free. What we understand from this resolution is expressing their anger. There have been hundreds of anti-China resolutions that the Senate and the House of Representatives have passed. The important thing that who is responsible for provoking this? China. Because at this point of time, they are punching their weight, annoying everybody, 19 neighbors. They have territorial disputes with everybody. Who loves China? Please give me a magnifying glass. I'd like to find out.
Yeah, there is a gentleman called Mr. Putin. We will discuss that with Sandeep Punithan, who's with us in the studio.
Let me tell you that he doesn't love China at all. The Russians don't. Go see a film called Russia Betrayed. It's all about how the Chinese are taking over Russia.
Clearly, in China, none of what we feel, think, what their own people feel, think doesn't really matter. What Xi Jinping feels and thinks is the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
So,
Dingling,
let's. Yeah. So stay with us, gentlemen. Stay with us, gentlemen. It's been a fascinating discussion already. Sandeep, and clearly that's the seriousness of the matter over here. The U.S. is building a bulwark against something that they feel is going to happen in Taiwan soon. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And
because we're all discussing the Ukraine war so much that we're not discussing the other big, global powder keg. Which is Taiwan.
Yeah, absolutely, Krishna, and I'm glad you brought that up, because what the Americans, what the West is up against today, looks like it's the Mongol Empire of old, right? You're looking at a Eurasian alliance of sorts, even if it's an alliance of convenience, as Ambassador Vora mentioned. The Russians don't like the Chinese very much, but they're fighting a war, and the Chinese are supporting them diplomatically and even militarily in that war. And the West is now confronted with two of the biggest land armies in the world. And their influence extends from the Pacific right up to the Baltic, right? So they would like to get divisions between these two countries. They would like to handle them separately. They would not want a united Russia and China front. And the biggest object is that they would not want to take their eyes off Taiwan, which is absolutely Xi Jinping wants Taiwan more than anything else in this world, I guess. He doesn't want Arunachal Pradesh as badly as he wants Taiwan. And there have been plenty of US predictions to say that there's going to be a war over Taiwan in as early as 2027, which is about just 5 or 4 years away. Now, the thing to see is that all this, the Senate, resolution, the statements coming out of the United States, the visits, AUKUS, they're all part of a grand plan of the Western alliance to kind of build a bulwark against the Chinese and the Russians. You have NATO in Europe. You have AUKUS in the Indo-Pacific. And India, in the middle of all of this, is a swing state. It's really important whichever side India goes on to is going to be the dominant side. And the Americans would certainly not want India sitting out of something as important as, the Quad or AUKUS or anything that contains the Chinese. And this is the biggest Chinese fear as well, that India on the side of the United States, they feel encircled, right? But for good reason, as Ambassador Vora again pointed out, the fact is they've had disputes with all of their neighbors, all of their 19 neighbors, which they've gradually settled. But the fact is that China feels hemmed in, and this has been the US strategy over the last couple of years to hold them down into the first island chain, which is basically the gap between Taiwan and the Japanese islands, that they would not want the Chinese Navy to come out of that. And the AUKUS, which we just saw 2 days back, this very, very significant announcement that the UK and the US were going to equip the Australian Navy with nuclear-powered attack submarines as part of that game. So I see this all as part of a giant chessboard, a global chessboard, where the US is now moving in with word and deed to contain the Chinese, to corral them, to make sure that they don't go for Taiwan.
Right. Sandeep Punithan, they're just telling us the state of play, so to speak, in the scheme of things, how this particular announcement, if you're wondering, the US Senate, which is a fractured Senate, if I may, Sandeep, we know the kind of the struggle for control between the Democrats and the Republicans in the US, both in the upper house of their parliament, which is Senate, and in the lower house, which is the House of Representatives. In the Senate, in a fractured Senate, they barely agree on anything either way, even for legislations within America. And here they are a unanimous call to acknowledge the McMahon line that's coming in for that, something they've agreed upon. They're still to send an ambassador to India. They're yet to agree on that, Sandeep. We are yet to have, for about 2 years, we haven't had an ambassador from the US, and we have Garcetti now being nominated again, Eric Garcetti. So they haven't agreed and done a lot of things, but they've done this for sure, which is the McMahon line. So it is very important that we understand the ramifications of this. And as Sandeep has been talking to us about, this is a part of a larger strategy in the scheme of things. Bear in mind, the Ukraine war is still on. All the tensions have been on it. But Taiwan is and will always be a constantly simmering situation. And as Sandeep was talking about, the focal point of the next world war, even if things don't go any worse in Ukraine already. But in the meanwhile, let me take this across to Ashwini Sivach, Major General Ashwini Sivach, who continues to be with us, our defense expert. Major General Ashwini Sivach, we've seen these, voice of support and other things coming in from overseas, from abroad, from global fora for India on the McMahon line. But, what does this do on the ground? What kind of an impact does this have on the ground? Does it have an impact on the ground or not at all in terms of the forces on the ground?
Krishna, not exactly. You see, as far as India is concerned against China, you have to fight your own war. And we are now having a line of actual control, something like line of control, starting from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. Especially in eastern Ladakh, there are almost more than 3 divisions sitting on both sides. And the Chinese have done a disengagement partially, but they have not de-inducted and de-escalated. There are 3 divisions along with the RT guns and tanks still in Rudong, and India is also equally capable of giving them a befitting reply. And same way is also on the central sector, basically in Uttarakhand and also Himachal Pradesh, and then going to the eastern sector. Now the point is, what does it mean to us? It means that, that as far as the US is concerned, they are with you in terms of giving you a certain intelligence, certain surveillance, certain imagery, satellite. Because you are a strategic partner, you have a 4 foundation agreement signed with them, starting from COMCASA, then LIMIO, and then the last one was the BECA, Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement. So the point is, there are not going to be any boots on ground other than India. It is only in terms of weapon, ammunition, and also real-time intelligence, which Americans are going to give you. But the way they have taken this stand, it makes your case more stronger. But let me tell you one thing, that why the Americans are doing this, because they know that for them Taiwan is very important, and they don't want the China to focus totally on Taiwan. They want that the China should bow down with India, and that is why they are passing statement and trying to make sure that India becomes stronger. And therefore, to divide the attention of China is very important as far as the US is concerned, because as you are rightly saying, that in the 3rd term of Xi Jinping, he is going to do something on Taiwan, and for that the Americans have to be well prepared. And today the Chinese Navy is becoming stronger day by day. They are the largest Navy. Notwithstanding that the Americans have got 2 aircraft carriers. I'm saying the quality
Ambassador Deepak Vora is vehemently shaking his head. I want to just quickly go across to him and get his thoughts, and I'll come back to you. Stay with us.
Is the Navy. I said that the Navy is largest, but not the quality.
Let's ask him. Hold that thought.
The quality is still far greater in US, because they have got 13 aircraft carriers and the Chinese only have got 3. And the submarines also, where the Americans have an edge over them.
Sivach, please hold on to your thought. Let me quickly take this across to Ambassador Deepak Vora, and I'll come back to you. Ambassador Deepak Vora, all yours.
Thank you very much. Your colleague Sandeep has put it across brilliantly. So have you. And General Sivach, I don't dare disagree with what he says, but you don't build a navy by constructing more ships. You had a one-child policy. You're going to have 95-year-old fellows sitting on your ships and manning them. Ping Pong is an ass. He's an egregious ass. Let me tell you something else, sir, if you don't mind. We've just said that Taiwan is his #1 priority. Oh, happy birthday. I thought the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is his #1 priority. And if he decides to take on Taiwan, that great rejuvenation is going back 300 years. The rest of the world will gang up against him. Taiwan, I believe, is not the priority at this time. He first wants the Chinese nation to come together, resume what he believes was the Middle Kingdom status that it had, etc., etc. So I don't think he's going to attack Taiwan, but as we say, dil ko behlane ke liye ghalib, ye khayal acha hai. Nothing is going to happen. He's going to scream, he's going to shout, he's going to yell, but he'll back off in the end, as he has done with us.
No, Krishna, I want to come in on what the general just said about the fact that this doesn't mean we have to fight our own battles. That's a very important point that he made, and we should not make too much out of this Senate resolution. The fact is that we have to fight our own battles. This does not mean that the Americans are going to rush in, boots on the ground. They're not in Ukraine, for God's sake. That's a place that, concerns them directly. And, they didn't deploy in 1962 when we were very close.
They don't deploy, they don't fight their war. They haven't fought their own war in this century.
It's almost
America has never fought a war for itself in this century.
Exactly. So we shouldn't get deluded by the fact that this means that the American cavalry is going to ride to the rescue. And this is something that's very clear in the mind of Indian decision makers as well. I remember one of the last meetings with General Rawat, Bipin Rawat. When I asked him about this, he said that, look, we have to fight our own battles. We are alone in case of war. We have a two-front war. It's an active two fronts with Pakistan and China, and we have to be prepared to fight by ourselves. And what this essentially means is that it's a big vote of confidence. If you read the text of that resolution, it actually documents the Chinese aggression over the last couple of years on the border, the infrastructure build-up, the aggression, the clashes, and how...
So it's not just India that's saying it, it's now the India and the US that's
they're just calling
saying the same thing. They're
calling out the Chinese for the bullies that they are, right? And it's a very, exhaustive list of Chinese transgressions, and the fact that how the Americans are saying, listen, you can't use this as a global standard, not for India, not for China, not for Japan, not for Taiwan. You can't, muscle your way, around the world. And that's the kind of thing that comes out of this resolution. So it's a big vote of confidence for the Indian stand, and the fact that the Americans say that, listen, we're hanging in with you. But, like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that this Americans are going to deploy in strength. They will give you a lot of assistance, like they are, helping the Ukrainians with ammunition and ISR and stuff like that. But it will never mean boots on the ground. Right. And as to Ambassador Vora's point about Taiwan not being a Xi Jinping priority, well, we can have a separate show on that. But I think it's a huge, huge thing. It's that last unfinished thing of the Chinese rejuvenation. Well, it's the unification of China. And if Xi Jinping were to get Taiwan, I mean, he would go down in history as the Chinese leader. He is already.
I think the word emperor is coming to
us. Yeah, it's almost like that. It's Emperor Xi, right? I mean, let's look at it this way. These two countries, China and Russia, they're empires, right? Yeah. And
it's the entire undivided Mongol empire.
Well, it's very interesting. They were the grand princes of Moscow, were the vassals of the Mongol empire. The Chinese dynasties were vassals of the Mongols, and here you have the two vassals together, the giant Eurasian empire that's looking at the West, and the Americans have to, shore up their allies and friends.
I think as we speak, our producers are just cueing us as to what to be speaking about. I think they're showing us the McMahon line, the graphics over there, because this is a line that has been debated about. India has been speaking about this. India has been calling out China on it time and again. Now, we've spent so many hours of news coverage, so many reams of newsprint, about the kind of excesses, the kind of things that the Indian forces have to go through who are positioned over there, simply because China lives in a world of its own, as Ambassador Deepak Vora was telling us about. And that's the line, ladies and gentlemen, the McMahon line, on your screens right now, for which a vote of confidence is coming from the US Senate. And as we've been talking, it doesn't mean any change on the ground immediately, but it does strengthen India's case and takes it closer to the US strategically on another very important standpoint that's crucial to India, and that is the state of Arunachal Pradesh that China is yet to recognize. Let me take this back to Ambassador Deepak Vora. Ambassador Deepak Vora, then this is a lot of, they say, legalese when it comes to law, talk about law or like technical terms about. This is all like diplomolese. diplomaticallys. All of this is like talk, of people in suits inside a big auditorium, and doesn't really go anywhere from here. Is that the case, or do you still think there is still hope that this kind of a voice of support from a fractured Senate in the US, coming in support of the McMahon Line, coming in support of Arunachal Pradesh in India, can lead to greater things going forward? At least diplomatic.
Great things going forward would be much greater American real support, military support for India. And we have all these agreements, a million of them. General Saab will tell you. Incidentally, let me also just point out, sir, that we shouldn't be worried as long as India has outstanding sons like Major General Sivaj, a very highly decorated soldier. Reality on the border really is that these guys will continue to make a noise. They're very worried. China is quadriplegic about a racket called the Quad. I'm sure you heard of it. And it's extremely worried about a thing called the AUKUS. If France had joined it, then it will become F.
At this stage, if I were to ask you, what's more dangerous to China, the Quad or the AUKUS? Because I was under the impression it was going to be the Quad.
I was hoping that France would join AUKUS, then it would become F AUKUS. I don't want to pronounce it. So that would be very funny.
No, that would be just focus. That's the correct word. There's nothing wrong in pronouncing that. F plus AUKUS is focus. It's focus. It's a good word. I don't know why you're shying away from it.
China is very frightened about everything that we are doing. All the minilaterals or the trilaterals, India, Australia, Indonesia, India, France, Australia, India, Japan, US. It's frightened. Who is to blame? A she. No, hang on. A she who's actually a he, right? Yeah, and the name is she, but it's actually a he.
Ambassador Deepak Vora. But I really want to ask you is that, what does this do for India's pleas, on international fora, the United Nations, when it comes to the recognition of the McMahon Line? Does this do anything at all? Or is this just that, like, the US is moving chess pieces, as Sandeep has been talking about, and cool, this chess piece move suits India, it benefits India, we're happy about it, but that's about it?
No, not really. When we have international discussion, we say, look, this country has recognized it, that country has done it. It strengthens our position enormously. There's no question about it. And as far as that racket called the United whatever in New York is nations, in New York is, forget about it. It's non-existent. It's a doddering old mummy, and we shouldn't do anything, worry about that. But here, an endorsement by the Americans, so like it or not, they are still the world's leading superpower. And if they say, listen, you are the good guys and we love you and this is your territory, well, thank you very much. Happy birthday. I appreciate the compliment.
All right. Sandeep, would you want to comment on that? Because we're having this discussion because one is that I thought it's great that people should focus on another issue, that people are forgetting very soon. Because we think about this when Galwan happens, we think about this when there's a problem happening. We're talking about a line where there are fisticuffs between two armed forces. That's the level of contention of this particular line. And lives have been lost time and again. Lives continue to be lost. At this stage, what do you think is the need of the hour now that we've gotten this particular vote of confidence from the US? Where do you think India can take it up immediately so that we don't lose any more lives on that line?
Well, Krishnan, that's not for us to decide. It's for the Chinese. And, in the last couple of years, I mean, this has been the stance of the government of India, and there's a certain correctness to it. It's that, look, when you moved in on the line of actual control in Ladakh, you basically tore up something like 30 years of agreements between India and China to keep the line non-militarized. The fact is that if you read the agreements, the text of it is so precise that they've defined how patrolling parties should behave when they come in contact with each other, the fact that they shouldn't have military exercises, they should not deploy heavy vehicles of the kind that you're seeing on screen right now. There's a lot of thought has gone into that. And then we realized that this was all a big ploy by the Chinese to buy time. As the Chinese proverb goes, hide your strength and bide your time. And this is exactly what they seem to have done. They use those agreements as a smoke screen. And I see a lot of smoke on screen, by the way. They used all these agreements as a smoke screen to build up their infrastructure capabilities on the line of actual control.
Very good point you make. As well, I want to quickly get a check from Major General Ashwini Sivach, who continues to be with us. Major Ashwini Sivach, talk to us about what your understanding in terms of the positions that China is building up around the McMahon line, in terms of the infrastructure they're building that Sandeep has been telling us about.
Absolutely. See, as far as Chinese are concerned, they are about 20 to 30 years ahead of us. And especially as far as Arunachal Pradesh is concerned, our mindset was there about 20 years back. If we develop Arunachal Pradesh, the Chinese are going to make use of the roads and can then roll down to Assam. So we took it a long time for us to start making infrastructure. But in last 10 to 15 years, the infrastructure development has taken place at a very great pace. If I start you from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, you are seeing the roads are coming, tunnels are coming, railway line are coming, logistic supply depot is coming. We are fast catching to China, and especially in Ladakh and central sector, we are there where they are, because we have almost caught on. It may be another 5-10 years. But certainly, as far as Arunachal Pradesh is concerned, it will still take us time, say another 10 to 15 years, where we can match up. Because first, that the terrain is very difficult towards our side. Second, we have not developed it for first 50 years. Now only we have started. Third thing is the weather condition our side are very, very bad, and the working period is only 4 to 5 months. But having said so, I can only say for certainty that our mindset has changed. You know, that a confidence which we have now from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, you know, we feel it that we have something in it and we can pay back Chinese in the same coin. Remember that the Chinese came with 3 divisions. Within month, we have a mirror image deployment. More than that, we on 29th, 30th August of 2020 occupied Kalas range, which Chinese never thought we can do it. And that was Richingla, Spangur Gap, and Chashur Mauldo Ball was under you. And the Spangur Gap, from where the Chinese came in 1962, was with us. We could go to China, but the Chinese could not come. That is a different thing, that we vacated Kailash range because we wanted the peace talks to continue. But certainly, I always thought we should not have given Kailash range in phase 1. We should have waited for them to vacate Depsang and maintain that status quo before giving Kailash range. But having said so, I can only say with certainty that today India is there and we can look into the eyes of the Chinese. We are developing very fast. Our morale is high. And the second thing is, as far as the fighting capability of Indian soldiers is concerned, is far greater than the Chinese. We are a battle-hardened army. We can stay on those high-altitude areas, rarefied environment. And the second thing is that we have done modernization of defense forces. Our man behind the machine is important. They have a conscription army. The Taiwan, they must understand what happened in Galwan, because we lost 20 brave hearts, but they lost 100 chaps. Why? Because they do not have that courage and guts to fight on. So I suppose that India is on the right path, and under the present government, we are taking no chance. Our infrastructure is going at a very fast pace, and the modernization of defense forces is taking place. That include Army, Air Force, and Navy.
Right. Right. So I think that's a very important point that Major Lakshmani Sivach is making. You know, and as a journalist who's been doing this for decades, you know, the way you've seen India-China relations pan out, how would you, sort of characterize the times that we're living in right now? You know, we're not in wartime, but tensions are extremely high. And you have these things happening where the U.S. Senate walks in and says, no, you've been right all along, and if you want us to back you on international fora, we'd be there for you.
Well, so the attitude, I think, now in New Delhi is one of trust but verify. And in a sense, what happened 3 years back when the Chinese mobilized across the line of actual control in Ladakh is that that trust that we had with the Chinese, however you want to describe it, but in the last couple of years, there had been a certain kind of trust that had been built up by the two sides, and we actually stuck by our side of the bargain. But the Chinese didn't respect that. But now what has happened is, like as General Sivach mentioned, the fact is that Ladakh and the line of actual control is flooded with troops. I was asking someone the other day, and he said that, look, where there were battalions once, there are brigades. Where there were brigades, there are now divisions. And where there are divisions, there are entire army corps there. So the place is saturated with
the
soldiers. And you have to, commend the Indian Army, the Indian Armed Forces for this, Krishna, because there is no other AUKUS or Quad partner which is actually standing, eyeballing the Chinese today. And they've actually drawn blood, right? In Galwan, what happened 3 years back. There is no other partner that's actually done that. Not the Americans, not the Australians, not the Japanese. And certainly not the Taiwanese. But the way we've been kind of holding the Chinese on the line of actual control is commendable. There's no other country that's got such a large disputed boundary with them, and we haven't backed down. That's one point that goes in our favor in the last 3 years. Despite everything that the Chinese have tried, right, all their psyops and deploying troops, and we've seen the kind of propaganda offensive that they had 3 years back, which we first saw in the Doklam standoff. We haven't backed down. In fact, our infrastructure building has actually only picked up pace in the last 3 years. We've not, the earlier thing, as Ambassador Vora mentioned, was the fact that we were so afraid of building infrastructure in the border areas. We were so afraid of building it because we were worried that the Chinese would use it to come and enter the Indian heartland. Now that mindset has changed. Today, there is a certain sense of confidence. There's a sense of belief that we can actually stand up to the Chinese. They're not 12 feet tall.
Very, very important change in the way things have been between these two countries, between India and China. Very important to recognize that, even as we recognize the acknowledgement coming in from the US Senate for the McMahon line. We do have two very special gentlemen continuing to stay with us. I'm afraid at this stage I have to let go of our colleague Sandeep Puridan. Sandeep, thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast and helping us understand so many things. We would continue to want your presence for many more such discussions. Thank you so much for joining us on this one. Now, keeping it with the special gentlemen who are joining us on the show are Ambassador Deepak Vora, former Indian ambassador to the US, France, Spain, Poland, Armenia, and Sudan. And we also have Major General Ashwani Sivach, defense expert, continuing to be with us on the show. This is the kind of story news that gets debated on a day like this across TV news channels and across all kinds of platforms everywhere. And we've just sussed the situation out. This acknowledgement means no change as far as the boots on the ground are concerned. As far as the situation on the ground is concerned, India is going to continue fighting the way it did. It has been for the last 3 years. But at the end of the day, the terms have changed in the way India fights this fight. There are more people backing India's good fight, if I may. Isn't it, Ambassador Deepak Vora?
There is no question about it, sir. You have with you Major General Sivach. Why does he fight? He fights for his honor. He fights for his safety. He fights for his loyalty to his mother. Her name is India. Why does the Chinese conscript fight? Because Tingling, Ping Pong, Dingling has told him to fight. He has no interest in fighting, sir. He doesn't even know. And my own theory, when these fellows came to Taiwan, is because they were told you were attacking Taiwan. They are so dumb they don't know the difference between Taiwan and Taiwan. That's a personal theory. I mean, it's
so
half serious.
At this stage, I want to ask both of you gentlemen, both of you can take a stab at it. Fact of the matter is that the Chinese army has not been in an actual combat in ever. So, as far as, final combat training is concerned, they are behind every other armed force in the world, isn't it, Major General Ashwani Sivach?
Absolutely. See, in 1962, we had a reversal. But we paid them back in 1967 in Nathula, where we had a 40 casualty, but we killed more than 400 Chinese. And the Chinese have fought no war after 79. The last war they fought was 79 against Vietnam, which is a small country, and they got a bloody nose. So as far as Chinese are concerned, they are a conspiration army. Their morale is low, their training is also lacking, and they do not have capability and capacity to fight in high altitude. I think Chinese know it. They have already realized it in Ladakh that they are fighting against a strong enemy now. India has an upper hand as far as training, morale, and also the capability of experience is concerned. So I suppose the Chinese also know it, and Chinese, though may have more number, but Indians are more trained, more motivated, and they are well equipped. The time is gone now, that where we used to bother that something will be coming to you. Now everything in the infrastructure fast catching. Why I categorically telling about Arunachal Pradesh? Because that's the place where we started late. But certainly we are now catching them up. Sela, tunnel is coming. Number of roads, tracks are coming. I commanded a battalion in Yangtze where the Chinese came. What a mighty 135, 150, Chinese came, and 40 Indian soldiers beat them black and blue. So that is the morale of the Indian troops. And same way I've been a chief of staff in 14 Corps Leh and Ladakh. I can only see the morale is not only high, the development which is taking place, and we are taking the villagers with us. So there is a total change of mindset. And what we have done is, we are now making number of roads and tracks and multilateral. We are not depending upon
change in mindset. Change in mindset, that's my takeaway, Major General Ashwani Sivach. There's been a huge change in mindset, both at a diplomatic level and as far as the boots on the ground. There's a huge change in mindset. That's very important for India at a stage like this, isn't it, Ambassador Deepak Vora?
There is no question about it, sir. I can only quote, I'm privileged to be involved in some way. I can only quote the Indian Prime Minister when he unveiled the statue of Naren. of Subhash Chandra Bose at India Gate in the nation's capital. He said, "Aaj hamare man bhi azad ho gaye." That's the reality. The Chinese have a lot of hardware. They don't have software like General Siva. And we will give them a bloody no. Sir, I was orphaned in 1962. It still hurts. I know these guys are treacherous. You can never trust a Chinese. I'd much rather trust a chap who lives, fellow called Satan or Lucifer, who lives in hell, than trust Tingling or any kind of Chinese fellow. They speak always with a forked tongue. So the reality today is, out of the 193 members of the United Nations, if a vote was taken, I don't think it ever will be, because that's not what the United Nations does. Leave out China, 192 will say, we trust India. We prefer to, our choice is India. And my response would be, yahi hai right choice, baby.
Right, but no, but the thing is that that's been the case for a while now. But we're still fighting our own fight at the end of the day, and fighting after a point a fictitious fight, because at the end of the day, all you pick out a document, you pick out a voice of support from a country, it's all will be you take a document out on the McMahon line, and all documents are fine. Just zameen nahi hai hamare paas. It feels like or we're not allowed to claim it the way it's meant to be claimed in the papers. My point is that at this stage, when we have something like this coming in from the Senate, when we are needed by the US strategically for its own purposes, can we push the ante further? Can we take this further? Can we take this further than it has been before?
Because we are still waiting to get real-time intelligence sharing, etc., with the United States. And these documents, these resolutions strengthen our case enormously. Here's your Senate, however fractured it is, saying we trust India. You are our buddy, saying we should support India. That's what we are going to use in our negotiation with those guys, saying your own parliament says Indians are terrific chaps, the Chinese are terrible guys, so why don't you give us what we want? That is happening increasingly, the number of agreements, including, sir, you know this better than I do, that thing about manufacture of microchips and semiconductors, the MOU that was signed 2 or 3 days ago. And that's a game changer. It's as big as the nuclear deal thing that we had signed 25 years ago. It's probably even bigger than that. The world is looking at microchips and semiconductors, at engineered intelligence, you call it artificial intelligence. And here's the United States saying, one country we trust with our technology is India. What more can I say?
Right. Clearly, there are many more factors going in India's favor at this point in time in the year 2023 than, say, about 10 years ago, and in many different ways, not just when it comes to the India-China relations or the world's relationship with China. Just want to understand, we are still in the midst of a war. It is a war that's being fought in Ukraine. How much, from here on, if you talk about Taiwan, do you think that Taiwan, there is talk about Taiwan blowing up in 2027, as a situation blowing up in 2027? Do you see that, happening any faster than that? Because the way things are going in Ukraine without any end in sight, how does this play out in the larger scheme of things?
Why would China want to take Taiwan? Why would it want to do it in 2027? These are media speculations. Some general or the other, some chap sitting there says 2020. Why not 2029?
That was my doubt. That was my doubt.
Yeah, why not 2035? Why not 2042? I mean, these are figures that are pulled out of the air. It means nothing. The reality, sir, and I'm persuaded, the Chinese are not going to risk being pushed back by several decades by an adventure in Taiwan. They'll get smashed very badly. The rest of the world, and remember, there's Japan, there's South Korea, there's Vietnam, there's whoever, they'll all gang up against China, which China is very scared of. It's wolves and it's warriors and it's diplomats. If you're a wolf warrior, you can't be a diplomat. Stupid fellows, they have managed to antagonize the rest of the world. No, sir, I do not think a war is inevitable. Whatever is happening in Ukraine, sooner or later, I've seen this, sir. An agreement will come. The Russians and the Americans will kiss and make up and say, buddy, sorry, we misread you, we misunderstood you.
And if that happens, let me just hold you right there. And if that happens, that means that the Russia-China friendship can end also immediately. Because at the end of the day, right now,
it'll end in 30 seconds, sir. The Russians don't like the Chinese, period. I've served there, sir. They tolerate them. They used to consider them a fifth world country till not so long ago. And they waited for so long to join NATO and get into the West. When the West said, wait a bit longer, then they looked east and found all this money. No one likes them, sir. I can't stress this enough. No one trusts them.
Loud and clear, sir. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. But the fact of the matter is that you're talking about a country that is still the second most populous country in the world. As an economy, it is, at least the second biggest economy in the world. You're talking about a situation that's not going to go away anytime soon. And Major General Ashwani Sivach has been constantly educating us how, like, all of this talk later, it's our boots on the ground, it's our men on the ground who are going to be fighting that battle on a day-to-day basis. Major General Ashwani Sivach, if I were to ask you, how do you contain the situation, assuming that Ukraine, a peace treaty in Ukraine is coming up, and Russia and China go back to where they were and not unnecessarily cozy up for the sake of the situation? Then my point is that, how can India move forward from there on?
See, one thing, Sandeep, is very clear, that we are watching this Russia-Ukraine war very closely. Somewhere we have been benefited, because as far as Russia is concerned, Russia and India are both strategic partners. We have made it very clear even to Americans. Americans tried to put pressure that you must not buy a discounted oil from Russia. But we said we mean business is our national interest. My point is larger, because we still have a 50 to 60% our weapons origin from the Russian. And the spare parts come from Russia, whether it is the aircraft or mixed series, or whether there are tanks or the Articon. Now, let's say we have the worst enemy with us is China. If the war takes place between India and China, we have to depend on Russia to get these weapons and also the spare parts. So therefore, it is important for us to have a very good relation between India and Russia, not undermining our relation with the US. But at the same time, we will like that the relationship between China and Russia should not become so good that they are at our cost. So that is very important thing. Now, what has changed now in last about 7 to 8 years is the type of faith which Americans are now putting on Indians as far as the transfer of technology is concerned. Earlier, they never ever parted with a latest technology, and we had no choice but to depend upon the Russian. But now they are keen that we must buy a Western weapons, and they are keen to give us the technology. The point is that M777 ultralight Howitzer was a gun which has been manufactured in India by Mahindra Defense, C-17 Globemaster, C-13J Hercules, and basically your attack after Apache, which they have given. So they are now giving those weapons which they are only giving to NATO. So there is a change of mindset and there is a transfer of technology. I feel that what AUKUS has come, where their nuclear powered submarine is now being given to Australia, I'm sure India must be also working. When can we take a nuclear powered submarine from Americans and they can jointly manufacture in India? That will be huge, because you need it. Though we are depending a little bit on Russia on this, but certainly you need a nuclear powered submarine, especially in Indo-Pacific. But overall, I say we have to be very watchful. We need Russia, we need America both. We can't say that, okay, we are a strategic partner with the US today, so we don't need Russia. We need Russia equally. And we need Russia for two things. One is weapons, equipment, and second thing is they must be at least neutral if they are not with us, not with China. So that is a very important thing, and we are very closely watching it. And we are not taking any step where we unnecessarily antagonize Russia, especially Russia-Ukraine war. Sandeep.
Right. This is Krishna over here, sir. Just in case, Major General Ashwani Sivach. Ambassador Deepak Ohra, I'm going to take the final comment from you. Clearly, India has to do this incredible balancing act, which it has already been doing all the while through the Russia-Ukraine war. And even when that peace treaty comes, India has a lot to play for in terms of striking the right balance, in the power play of global geopolitics.
Let me assure you, sir, with all the vehemence at my command, I've been in diplomacy 50 years and counting. Leave me out, but the Indian diplomatic service today is the best in the universe, the best in human history. We know exactly what we are doing and how to do it. Remember, they told us don't buy Russian oil, other this, that, and the other. Now they all say, all right, you do what you want. Don't buy the SS-400, whatever. Okay, we understand what you're doing. There's a complete transformation in their perception of India. And I was speaking to the three African leaders we met recently, whom I'm privileged to serve as special advisor. All three said, if there can be a solution to Ukraine, by the way, two of them didn't even know where Ukraine was. They said, if there has to be a solution to this war, only India. Only a fellow whose name you've heard of, Narendra Modi, can solve this. That is the reputation of India.
Absolutely.
That's too many expectations on us, but sir, let me assure you, the Indian Foreign Service will deliver.
Right. Fantastic. Ambassador Deepak Voda, former Indian ambassador to the US, France, Spain, Poland, Armenia, and Sudan, and Major General Ashwani Sivach. Thank you so much, both of you gentlemen, for taking time out to be with us. And as you rightly pointed out, it is all about how well India can do. It's not about how India is going to do well or not, both in terms of boots on the ground and in terms of diplomacy, positioned perfectly well and with the right human resources to accomplish what this great nation needs to accomplish. And with that, I'm afraid we've completely run out of time here on this particular edition of News 9 Live. Thank you so much for watching. Keep it with News 9.